It's Wednesday, December 3rd, and this is the 1909, the State News' weekly podcast featuring our reporters talking about the news. I'm your host, Alex Walters. Last time Michigan State University launched a major fundraising campaign, Obama was worried about the midterms, Nicki Minaj's Anaconda was topping the charts, and the Ice Bucket Challenge was all the internet rage. Yes, 2014 was the last time the university made a major fundraising push. That, of course, is also before the university weathered all sorts of perception-shaping scandals, like the Larry Nassar scandal, Mel Tucker, an unprecedented rate of presidential turnover and dysfunction on the board of trustees. But now they're back, and they're raising money again with a new president, and our reporter, Owen McCarthy, has written a great story about what that means for a university to do this sort of major fundraising endeavor. They call it a capital campaign, and he's here to tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Alex.
So first of all, tell us, this terminology of capital campaign. What does that mean? What's the difference between, universities raise money all the time? What does it mean when they do this sort of like announcement of a concerted effort? How does that differ from just raising money?
Yeah, so when we're talking about sort of a concerted effort like this, oftentimes there's going to be a sort of like branding or sort of tagline to come along with the campaign. We're raising money for this sort of set of particular reasons that is going to help our university progress in this sort of specific way. I mean, they're not going to be that specific a lot of times. It's like, I don't know, like think about the phrase like Spartans will, for example. Like that, it's more abstract, but I'm just saying
there's like a theme or an idea that is supposed to compel people to donate.
That's exactly right. Yep. And when we talk about these concerted efforts, there's specific sort of goalposts, if you will. We want to raise this amount of money. We want to do it kind of in this time frame. With all these sort of capital campaigns, whatever you want to call it, these universities will sort of set a goal. I mean, what comes to mind is the University of Michigan, for example. In October, they launched what they're calling their biggest fundraising campaign in school history, and the goal was $7 billion. I think we can expect that MSU's won't be up there just when you compare the size of the endowments and just the size of the universities. But yeah, so that's another element, is having a very specific goal that you want to achieve within a certain amount of time.
And this is, to be clear, too, MSU hasn't publicly announced this campaign. You
That's
reported
right.
this. You were able to get advancement to confirm that it was happening.
Yeah.
But we're reporting that this exists. We don't necessarily know all the details of it.
That's right.
But can you tell me, to what extent did they tell you about it? What do you know from advancement about what this campaign will look like?
Yeah, so, officially, advancement, in the statement they wrote to me was sort of like, it is correct that we are, about to launch this campaign. They said, there's much to be proud of and more we aspire to achieve together with our Spartan community and friends of the university. Stay tuned for a bold campaign that intends to help Spartans solve the grand challenges of our time and prepare our students for the opportunities of today and the future. So not a lot of specifics, but like I said, there's usually that sort of theme. And I think you can sort of see a signal there of a bold campaign that intends to help Spartans solve the grand challenges of our time and prepare our students. That's kind of all the details we have on it to this point.
Yeah, and I had a chance to sit down with the MSU president this morning, and I asked him a little bit about this, and he kind of walked around along those same lines of saying that the focus of this campaign, he hopes, is going to be like student success, which I guess is scholarships or support for students. Not necessarily, some capital campaigns are about like a big new building, a new dormitory, maybe like something for athletics, like a stadium. This one will be kind of along those student success lines.
Yeah. Well, and we've sort of gotten an indication earlier that the capital campaign might kind of be along those lines. And the main way we got that indication is, you reported on this months ago, but President Kevin Guskiewicz, one of the kind of first things he did in his administration was he signed a contract. He hired the McKinsey consulting firm, McKinsey & Company, and they sort of outlined and gave him guidance. And the contract was about $2 million. They gave him guidance on his administration's priorities, basically.
Yeah. And one of those is, the idea of this capital campaign.
That's right.
Specifically that it would be centered on like scholarships or other student success initiatives.
Yeah, and it talks specifically about the report from McKinsey talks a lot about this demographic cliff and how does MSU sort of stay relevant and also kind of at the same level of its peers in the Big Ten, right? And it said that one of the ways MSU is sort of lagging is when we think of retention rates. So that basically just means once people come to us in their freshman year, how often are they staying with us, or are they leaving? And they also found that, MSU's retention rate is lagging behind some of its peers, and that the number one reason for that is because of financial reasons. And so McKinsey says one of the ways that you can, sort of mitigate this is by, I think they even call it, launch Spartans for Spartans fundraising campaign to fund retention efforts. And they provided as examples mental health resourcing and bridging loans. And that was meant to have a focus on closing this gap that you see, particularly in retention rates among underrepresented students and non-underrepresented students.
So if MSU wants, especially underrepresented students from like marginalized groups, to be able to stay for 4 years and not have this higher rate of dropping out, the idea would be you do this big fundraising campaign, and then you use that money to fund scholarships and programs and whatnot to help students.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And it's interesting, too, because a lot of these capital campaigns, it'll be like the big building or whatever, and you put your name on it. Like when Broad raised a lot of money a couple years ago, there's like the Minskoff Pavilion, and he gave tens of millions of dollars, and in exchange, kind of his name is on that pavilion.
Yeah.
And when I was talking to the president this morning, I was asking him about, like, well, is there going to be some sort of like physical infrastructure that a donor can put their name on? Because that's, I think, a big part of that kind of fundraising. And his thought was that, maybe the stuff you're raising money for, these scholarships, endowments for certain kinds of professors and stuff, might not be the thing a donor is going to like slap their name on, but that MSU could retroactively give naming rights to some of these beautiful new buildings on campus, the STEM building, this new rec center, the multicultural center, that don't have like a namesake donor, but a name could be added to it for someone who gives to these initiatives. Yeah,
it's interesting you mentioned that. I actually spoke to sort of prominent donor for this story, whose name is James Billman. And
of the Billman Pavilion.
Exactly, of the Billman Music Pavilion. And so, he's responsible for a host of sort of professorships and scholarships, but he also at some point got that sort of tangible physical thing where his name was attached to something on MSU's campus.
It's a great pavilion. I have rehearsal there.
You know it well, don't you?
Yeah, I see. There's a big picture of his face in the lobby.
Really?
And whatnot. Yeah, and like it's kind of like in this display of all the donors. There's like his face, then a long list of the other smaller donors.
His face is like the biggest out of the faces.
He's the only face. The rest are his names.
Then the rest is list. Okay.
But anyway, tell me, the timing of this capital campaign is interesting because obviously it's coming with the new president, but it also is in some ways kind of belated, right? I opened the show with talking about 2014, which with our little kind of cheesy cultural references feels very, very far away. Yeah. That's the last time MSU was raising money. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about that campaign, the 2014 campaign? That was the last time they did this?
Yeah, so one thing to mention is that with these campaigns, the public launch of them generally is they sort of will have these kind of quiet phases of the campaign where they're going to their donors, and it is this concerted effort, but it's not this like publicly visible thing. And then once they reach a certain level, a certain threshold of their goal, that's when they make this public push, right? And so the campaign actually started its quiet phase in like 2011, and then in 2014 was the public launch of it. And then soon after that, you had big kind of chip-ins from Minskoff, and you had Dan Gilbert was kind of in the folds of Quicken Loans, no? Right?
Rocket.
Yeah. And so, people were paying attention, sort of prominent donors were like, this is great. We want to get in on this. We want to support MSU. The campaign lasted all the way until 2019. It had crossed its goal of $1.5 billion, I think as early as 2017, and then it sort of continued.
The momentum's there. You keep it going.
Exactly. I mean, why would you stop, And so then they reach about like 1.83 billion in the year 2019, and that was when they said, okay, we're done with our campaign. It's been great. Thanks for your support, basically.
And so the quiet phase is when you're kind of meeting with individual big donors and courting, and that feels like where MSU is now with this campaign. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, they've not. I'll tell you, MSU has not given me any details about, we've been in the quiet phase. But when I was talking to the donor, for example, he was sort of acting like, well, yeah, I mean, they never stopped raising money and tapping in with their donors. It's just not been this publicly visible thing.
When I was talking to Guskos this morning, he said like later this week he'll be in Florida meeting with some people to talk about giving money and stuff. And I guess right now they're sort of gauging interest and then. And is it reasonable to expect when they do the kind of, I guess, the loud phase of the campaign, when the public phase maybe, is that when they'll detail actually not just this like broad theme of student success, but what this money will go to specifically if people give?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Generally, when universities publicly launch their campaigns, that's when they sort of lay out, here's what we're going to do. We're going to build this. We're going to make this scholarship, whatever it is. So I think it's reasonable to expect, more details at that point. And they advancement has sort of indicated that to me, of like, when we were working on the story and everything, they were like, well, because we're so far out, or not so far, but a number of months out from the public launch, we can't give the details right now. So sort of the implication was that the details will come when that public launch does happen in the coming months, whatever that means.
What about the timing of this for MSU? Because, I mean, this is an odd moment for the university. In the time since this last campaign 10 years ago, you've had this major sexual abuse scandal that was, Larry Nassar, that was known globally. It was covered by the national media intensely. Strong association with MSU. You have Mel Tucker. You have everything with Sanjay Gupta. And you also just have these perception-shaping moments that I think really stick with students, with alumni. I mean, the shooting, of course. And a myriad of other kind of smaller scandals. Just this week, we reported on a new Department of Ed investigation into the Olin Health Center for a sexual assault allegation there, or allegations there. Is it fair to say that this is like a weird time, a bad time to do a campaign? I mean, are they taking into... Is there a thought about what it means to do a campaign coming off of all that scandal?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the outside looking in, it can seem like, there's been a lot of sort of turbulence going on, and it might seem like an inopportune time to start soliciting donations. But there's actually research out there, and I got in touch with these researchers for this story, that shows that universities are largely unimpacted really by these sort of scandals. These researchers particularly looked at federal Title IX investigations, which is applicable to MSU because there's 7 federal Title IX investigations of MSU as we speak. But I think they also give some indications about bad press in general, was the term they used, bad press. And yeah, MSU has had its share of bad press, let's be honest here. But what these researchers found is that when you're looking at these specific university outcomes that are measurable, like enrollment and like alumni donations, which is very pertinent to this discussion, bad press is not negatively impacting these universities. In fact, in some cases, the universities tend to start soliciting money more when they're going through these tough times. And I sort of asked these researchers, I was like, well, did you do any sort of qualitative analysis to see when these universities are soliciting donations, are they framing it of like, hey, we're going through it right now, we need help? And the researchers were like, that would be an interesting extension of our work. We didn't look at that. So they just looked at the quantitative stuff. But what they found was that, the rates at which alumni are giving tend to be sort of even almost equal or unaffected, and in some cases even higher when there's this bad press in these federal Title IX investigations, and also the rate at which universities solicit the donations can be a little bit higher.
So both after bad press, donors might give even more, and universities might seek even more?
That's right. That's right. Yep.
Do they talk about why? I mean, of these researchers, do they have some sort of like explanation for why that might be? Because that seems counterintuitive, but it's what the data shows.
Yeah. So the big thing that they focus on in their report is this concept called salience. And so basically, it's pretty simple. It's almost common sense. It says, look, if a university has been in the news, regardless of what reason, it is more likely to sort of be fresh in people's minds. So the researchers find that, for example, when it comes to enrollment, people don't think that hard about enrollment. If you're listening and you came to MSU and you thought really hard about it, that's awesome. But a lot of people are like, where do I go to college? I know this place is by my house, whatever. And so what the researchers found is like, people don't think that hard about it. And if they've been hearing about the place in the news, they just have that association. It's fresher in their mind, and it's that salience piece. And they said that could be a reason for the increased sort of giving from alumni in these times where there's lots of bad press and media attention, because the institution is just fresher in their mind.
Don't just remember that's somewhere to give my money to.
Yeah. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Well, we'll have to watch how this plays out. I wonder if this will work out for MSU, be a successful campaign, and I'm sure we'll have you again when we know kind of more concretely some of the details of what this campaign will actually be raising money for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your reporting. We will be back next week with more great stories from the minds here at the State News. Until then, Owen's story and others are available at statenews.com. Thank you again, Owen, for coming on.
Thanks
Our
for having me.
podcast coordinator, Taylor, for making it sound so nice. And most of all, thank you for listening. For the 1909, I'm Alex Walters.